Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. In this video I'd like to show you how you can rapidly multiply your basil plant just from cuttings and how quickly and easily you can get one small scrawny little plant like this into a huge crop of basil. So what I've got here is probably the cheapest basil you can get in the supermarket. This was only 50p here in the UK. As you can see, it's a very small pot. The plants are very tall and scraggly. There's not really any leaves in the lower down section. If they are, they're very small leaves. There's not bad growth on the top, but generally it's a very scrawny plant, very poor quality. You can get a much larger, thicker plant if you pay 2 or 3 times as much. But I'm just using this as a good example, and I'm just using this for cutting materials. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to propagate lots of cuttings. From those cuttings I'm going to further propagate more cuttings once they put on some growth. And I'm going to show you how rapidly you can actually put on a decent crop of basil from just taking cuttings from cuttings. So I'm starting this on the 21st of December, and I'll keep giving you regular updates throughout the video and let you know the dates and how quickly things are progressing. So first of all, I'm just going to take my cuttings. So I'm taking the cuttings as you would normally with basil, and that is just cutting just below a node. So you can see there's a node here. I'm going to cut just below that, and the reason for that is when this is in the water, most of the hormones for producing roots come from around these nodes, and this is where the plant can produce the most amount of new roots. So that's why I need to cut it just below that section, so all the hormone, when it comes down from the growth shoot, collects in the bottom here, and it gives you a good root structure, and it will grow roots nice and quickly for you. So that's already quite a good selection of cuttings. All I need to do now is remove some of the lower leaves so that they don't get too wet in the water, because if the leaves get completely wet they will actually rot off and die. So I'll just snip them off and then start popping these in the water. Now the optimum size for a basil cutting is probably about this size. You could actually go really extreme and just have tiny little cuttings. I'm not going to go to that quite extreme in this video. I mean, the success rates really start to drop, but I'm just going to go for this kind of size. What I'm looking for is for 2 good nodes that are going to be underwater, and then at least 4 leaves on the top. And that should give me a good compromise between getting a decent number of cuttings from a small plant and also getting a good success rate. As I said, if you wanted to go really extreme, you could get a lot more cuttings from a plant of this size, but in doing so, each cutting would have a lot less chance of survival. So these ones, I'm just going to let them grow on. I could take cuttings from them, but they're really a bit small for taking cuttings from. So I'm going to let this grow. The ones that I've cut off, they might grow cuttings, they might not. They don't have any leaves on them. If I was to leave maybe a couple of leaves lower down, then they would have probably regrown, but it's a bit touch and go as they're quite young plants. Unfortunately there aren't any lower leaves. I don't know, they seem to have all fallen off previously in the pot, but quite often you will have lower leaves on the basil, and that they should resprout with no problem. So what I'm going to do is put these under a grow light to make sure they get plenty of light. I'm also going to put them with a heated mat underneath to make sure they're nice and warm. I'm not going to have the grow light too intense at the moment until the roots start beginning to grow, because at the moment they can't really get much moisture into themselves, and until they can get a lot of moisture into the plant with roots, they can't handle a lot of bright light. But as soon as they start getting some good root growth and put some really bright lights on them, that should really encourage some very strong root growth, and then I can put them in soil, and that will take me on to the next stage of this propagation. So it's been 18 days now since I took the cuttings in the original part of the video, and as you can see they've done really well. You can see how lush green they are. They've definitely increased in size a lot. The leaves are much darker green, much healthier looking plant. This is the original that I took the cuttings from. As you can still, it's looking still rather anemic, quite yellow. The reason for that is this hasn't been on a grow lamp. These two have been in a grow lamp, so they've really been able to get a lot of sunshine. These have been on a sunny windowsill, but up here in Scotland, even though it's south-facing windowsill, there's very little sunlight, so they're really struggling. So what I'll do for the next stage is I will also have these under a grow lamp to try and increase their height and growth, and hopefully with them I can get more cuttings. But the soil in here isn't going to be the best, so I'm not going to get the best results from these, but these will give me some really good results. As you can see from the video, they've done well. It's been 18 days of growth. The first little while in the video, they were just getting the roots started. Once the roots were started, I added some feed, increased the light intensity, and the growth really started to shoot on then. And now they've got such good root systems, they're now ready to be potted on. So I'll go ahead with these first. These aren't too tangled because there's only 3 in here. As you can see, they've got fantastic root systems, really grown very nicely, nice branch root system. Most, as you can see, comes out the end where the node is, but it does also grow along the whole length of the stem. So I'm just going to put that in a pot, making sure all the roots are covered up. It doesn't have to be central in the pot as long as all the roots are covered up. And then I'm just going to top it up with more compost. So there we are, that's them all potted up into their own individual pots now. What that'll do is it'll give the roots a much better growing conditions. The water in here was becoming stagnant, and unless I had an aeration system to create a proper hydroponic system, they wouldn't be able to survive in water for much longer. So now they're in the soil, they will be set back slightly. You'll find the growth will be put in check, and the reason for that is the roots have got used to growing in water. Now they're growing in soil, it's quite a different growing condition for them. So until the roots get used to the new growing conditions of the soil, their growth will slow slightly. But once the roots get established and get used to the new soil, they will grow really fast, put on a huge amount of growth, and I'll start giving them a high nitrogen feed to really encourage a lot more leaf growth. And then the next stage will be cutting these back, taking some new cuttings from these, and then just repeating the step again with the water, just to continue bulking up the mass and getting more and more plants. And eventually I'm going to have a huge crop of basil really fast. So the next stage of this project is I'll be putting these under grow lamps again, keeping them well watered. The colour will be slightly different on the video. That's because I've only got one white grow lamp, the other one's kind of two-tone blue and red, so it's going to look a bit kind of strange. The foliage might even look black under the lights. And that's a special LED grow lamp that I have. It's much more powerful than the last one, and now that they're in soil, they should be able to handle a bit more light conditions. The other thing you might notice in the video is there might be 1 or 2 other plants appearing in the video. That's just because I've only got a limited number of grow lamps, so some other plants might appear in that video. But otherwise it'll just be the basil, and hopefully this one as well will respond nicely to the brighter light conditions. Just to quickly say about the growing medium I'm using, it's actually a very rich peat-based compost that I'm using. The reason I'm using peat-based is because it's really good for holding water and also storing the nutrients from the liquid fertilizer I'm going to give it. So the plants really like a good rich medium like that. But I've added a little bit of perlite as well, because I find a rich peat growing medium can be quite bad for waterlogging. Also doesn't let a lot of air in, so just giving a little bit of perlite just to help the structure to be loosened up slightly, and that should encourage better root growth. So it's now been 21 days since these have been put into soil. As you can see, they've done really well. Over the last 21 days, you probably saw from the time lapse, the initial period the growth was quite slow as the roots were acclimatizing to living in soil. Then at the very last, probably 3 days, so it was probably only about half a second or 1 second on the time lapse, they suddenly shot up really fast. That's because I started to give them a high nitrogen feed, and that really started to boost their growth. And as you can see, they're getting quite tall now. The leaves are really large, looking lush. Even the original plant is starting to look healthier. It's not quite as lush, and that's because the soil in here isn't the best and there's too many plants in the one pot. But you can have a comparison there. You can see the slightly lighter in colour and the leaves aren't as big. So now I'm just going to do one more bulking up stage, and I'll explain why I'm going to do that stage now. Even if you weren't going to try and get more plants, this pruning stage is quite important to get a nice healthy bushy plant. The reason for that is basil tends to grow very tall and leggy. These can grow 3 or 4 foot tall, and they won't branch a huge amount. But if you give them a prune, then they'll really branch out well and actually get much better yields and a healthier, stockier plant. So I'm going to start with this one here. You can see there's plenty of side branches starting to form down here, but these aren't really going to grow much until the top has been cut. What the plant will do is focus all the growth that it has into the top part, and it won't really put much growth into the lower branches unless you cut that top section off. So you can use this opportunity to either take this as a harvest, you know, if you've got enough plants you can just keep harvesting the tops and it'll encourage more side shoots to push up, and you can continue that over time. Or you can go back to stage 1 and pot this into a glass of water or a water container and make new plants from it. And that's what I'm going to do in this, just to bulk up the numbers even more. So I'm going to cut it slightly differently this time, and I'll give you the reason for that. So you can see down here you've got the several shoots coming out from a little node down at the bottom there. And I want to cut it just above that node, and the reason for that is I don't want a long section of stem, because the stem, you can't get new shoots growing out of the stem, you can only get new shoots growing out of where these nodes are, which are basically where the leaves attach to the plant. So I'm going to cut it just above there. So you can see there that can become a cutting. So it looks a lot smaller now, but as you can see there's several new stems that are ready to sprout out, and this will become quite a nice bushy plant. You can see there's probably going to be at least 4, maybe 5 or more stems that will grow out of this and make a bushy plant. Also this will encourage these lower ones to also grow, and so that's going to be really filling out quite nicely. And then with this plant, all I need to do to make it into a cutting is remove the lower leaves. These lower leaves I can use in cooking or whatever I want to use them for. The lower shoots also need to come out as well, so I'll take them out. Because there's not a lot of stem length, I'm actually going to go further up and take out these ones as well. It depends on how long your stems are. If it's quite if you've been growing in a strong light like I have, you'll notice the spacing between the leaves is very short. If it's been growing somewhere that's less sunny, then the spacing will be a lot longer. So all I need to do now is cut this bottom section off to the just below a node like I did in the first section of this video, and then put that in water. So I'm going to go around now, do that to all the plants, and you'll see that I should get quite a good harvest of leaves and also quite a lot of material for making new plants with. So you can see with this plant, even though I cut it down really short, I took most of the material off because it hadn't put a huge amount of growth. The growth it did have was very stocky. You can see what that has meant is that there's only a little bit of plant left in the pot, but that's not an issue as long as there's some leaves and there's somewhere for some new growth to appear from. So for example, on this one there's a node here. You can see where there's new shoots and where the leaves get attached is the node, and so I know this is going to grow away and be happy and healthy. If it was like some of these younger plants here that I cut in the beginning of the video, and you can see there was no obvious leaves left on them, they've actually died and just become brown sticks. So as long as you've got some leaves and you've got some nodes left on the plant, they will produce more leaves and grow again. So you'll see this one on the time lapse that I'll do soon, and you'll see how well that grows, even though it's been cut back quite hard. And the one plus side of having such a stocky plant like this one, these are kind of the same as well, they're very stocky, is you get a huge amount of leaf in a small area. So you can see I've done just a few already, and there's already a huge crop of leaves that I can use for cooking. This one is in fact still very small, so it's going to be a bit short for me to get any sizable cutting out of it. You can see there that the spacing between the leaves is very short, but I'm still going to cut this one, and the reason being this will encourage all these lower shoots to branch out. So I'm just going to cut this off around about this height. What that will do is it will encourage these several other shoots to grow up, and there's also ones lower down as well, and this will become a nice bushy plant because of that. And then with this remaining material I can just take all the leaves off, and that can become more cooking materials. So that's all the cuttings now. All the cuttings you can see have been cut down and pruned. You can see the amount of material I've got from them for cooking with. You can also see how many new plants I'm going to have. I think there's 6 plants here that I'm going to be able to make from them. But I've also got this old plant. This is the original mother plant, so I can take some more cuttings of this and get even more crops. So there we are, that's all the cuttings I can take from that one. So these original cuttings here are just going to go back under the grow lamps to let them grow further. These are also going to have a little bit of light, but they're not going to have intense light. The same kind of treatment I did with the first lot. As you can see here, I've already got a huge crop of leaves, and this is already way more plants than you would have had if you just kept with the original mother plant. The original mother plant would maybe have doubled in size in this time, but as you can see we've already increased the yield massively. So I'll put these on time-lapse again, and we'll see you later in the video to see how much they've grown and to see how well these cuttings have done and see if we can get another harvest from them. So it's been 19 days now since the last update, and as you saw in the time lapse, the growth wasn't quite as good this time, and the reason for that is the temperature's been quite low in my flat. So I've had the thermometer up showing what the temperature was in the video, so you can see in the video how cool it was. It was down to about 17 at times, so because of the cold temperatures it's been quite slow, but they have grown quite well. In the last few days I've actually had them under a heated propagator for 6 days just to try and increase the heat. Because I can't keep the temperature in my whole flat warm, I can only afford to keep a small area warm. But as you can see, they've grown really well. Some have grown bigger than others. You can see this one wasn't cut as hard in the past anyway, so it's got plenty more new shoots. Some of the ones that were cut really hard are a lot smaller, but as you can see they've got loads of really bushy growth, and that will bush out nicely. And this is the original mother plant again. It's been growing very well. The top touched the top of the propagator, which is why it's bent over, but there's plenty of strong growth. So you can see here now these are almost ready to be cut back again and take more cuttings from. So these could either be taken back as cuttings or they could be harvested. And then the cuttings I took 19 days ago, they've all grown plenty of roots, as you can see there. They're ready for going on to make new plants. So I'll count them out, see how many we have. So we've got 10 cuttings in total. You can see in here that they've got some really good root growth on the go. So these are ready to be planted out into their own pots. So in total that would be another 10 new plants here. Then we've got 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 plants. So that would be 18 plants in total. And then of course if you took any cuttings of these, you'd get another big crop of plants. And then in about 20 days time, you could take cuttings from again. So basically you can have an exponential amount of basil. You never need to grow any more basil again. What you can do is just harvest as much as you need. If you find that you need a bit more, some of the bits that you cut off, just put in water to propagate them. And as I was saying, I've been doing this over winter in Scotland. So the growth hasn't been that rapid. It's been quite cold in my flat. If you live somewhere that's got the temperatures in the mid-20s, you could probably get this result in 1 month. This has been 60 days in total now, to the day. It's been exactly 60 days, so it's been about 2 months it's taken through all these cuttings. But as you can see, all I started was this plant, which hasn't really changed in size because I've been constantly taking cuttings off it. But as you can see, if I had just left that in that one and didn't take any cuttings, that would probably be twice the size as it is now, maybe 3 times the size. But you wouldn't have all these extra other plants and you wouldn't have all these cuttings on the way. So that's the video done now, just to show that how many cuttings you can take from a single plant and how just after 30 days you can start taking cuttings off those cuttings, and then it just kind of spirals from then on, snowballs, and you can just have as many plants as you want from a single plant of basil. So I think that's all for this video. As I say, if you want to increase the speed of how you do it, I took 60 days in cold temperatures, but if you can get high temperatures, high light intensity, you can definitely get this kind of production in just about 30 days.